Hello guys and welcome to SimUK. Railsim 2021 has just released their free-to-all demo version of their highly anticipated first release. You can go to Steam right now and download that and try this game out for yourself. I've also got loads of gameplay footage. You can watch that as I struggle through the tutorial and then proceed to struggle on to try and complete the route. In it you will have access to just one route, one EMU and two scenarios, which are basically the same, but one of them has a kind of a spoken tutorial over the top of it. The route is from Warsaw to Katowice and it's 316 kilometers long with a maximum speed of 160 kilometers per hour, and there are 7 stops in total for you and the 34WE EMU to stop at. There's a lot to talk about, so in order to keep things on track, pun intended, I will be highlighting each of the areas that I'm reviewing and try and keep things as brief and on schedule, pun intended, as I possibly can. Be sure to check out the links in the description below, pun not intended, to see my attempts at creating gameplay for this title, and if you're lucky you might even get to see some whales, you know, at the Whaleway station. Sorry, I can't forget. Let's move on. In this review, I will discuss graphics, performance, audio controls, and levels of simulation, or realism if you will, and whilst the obvious comparison is going to be between this and the current leading train sim specialist, which is Train Sim World, this is not a Train Sim World versus Railsim 2021 video. Where applicable though, I will make comparisons, but only if I deem it to be relevant. So graphically, Railsim 2021 has a pretty unique look. It's not running on the Unreal Engine, it's running on Unity, and that in itself gives it a distinct look from many other games these days. At times, it looks like you're playing in a painting, and it reminds me, I don't know why, it reminds me an awful lot of Thomas the Tank Engine. Is it just me? Does it do the same for you? I don't know why it does that, but that's what I think of when I see this game. The modelling of the locomotive itself and the stock are pretty detailed. I'm quite impressed with it, although it does not appear to be using the highest textures of or resolution for textures right now. So there's some blurry stuff on there, and yeah, it definitely needs some work. There's tons of graphical tweakable options in the menu, which is great, so playing around in there could definitely improve things. The lighting at times is very believable, but I have to say on the most part, it's another area that's in need of work. Especially in areas where shadows are formed. There's some distinct problems in that area. The locomotives appear to be ultra shiny, and yet inside the cockpit it is so dark that you can hardly see most of the buttons and the dials, etc. Now there might be an in-cab light which would illuminate the entire cockpit and sort of resolve that issue, but I have yet to discover it. The LOD system seems to be pretty short in my opinion, so expect a lot of pop-in. More so though than pop-in, there's like a lot of merge. Stuff sort of evaporates in reverse. I don't know what the opposite of evaporate is, but it suddenly sort of evolves in front of you. It doesn't pop in so much as evolve in front of you. Now, I find that to be far less irritating than it is in Train Sim World 2, or perhaps it's just less noticeable, at least at the moment. In time it might become an irritation. But I actually think Train Sim World 2 has greater LOD distance. I haven't really played around with the settings too much because, well, I'll discuss that in a minute, but just the way that it's done seems to be less irritating, less distracting, I think. Because it's not a pop-in situation, it kind of evolves in front of you, it is less irritating than it is when you're driving in Train Sim World. So that's obviously bespoke, it's personal, that's for me, maybe you see that differently, but I think it's an area that could definitely be improved again. In fact, pretty much every single area could be improved, but for a demo, I think it's quite impressive what we're seeing at the moment. Now, it says that the routes are like-for-like designed on real locations, and although that might well be true, I find that the locations themselves are to be a little bit underwhelming. They're quite bland, square buildings in the distance, and they don't really look very realistic. They're kind of... There's some shading issues, some lighting issues that just make them look very fake. It's not terrible, and stuff that's closer to the line definitely seems to be a lot better. Although some of the stations, I think, look to be very basic in their design. In fact, almost carbon copies of each other. Now, it might well be that that's exactly what the stations look like in real life. I can't say for sure. But for me, it looks like that's an area that definitely needs looking at. Smashing all the settings up to absolutely maximum doesn't do very much to solve the problem either, and it certainly doesn't do a lot to help with the performance issues. So let's talk about performance. I do not believe that RailSim has finalised their optimisation, and that's understandable at this stage. After all, this is just a demo. Now, I've had no crashes from the game, nothing at all. It seems to be very, very stable. I've also had no significant stutters. I have had stutters, or any noticeable serious glitches or issues with the modelling, etc. Passengers are hilarious to watch. They lean over and they appear to be intoxicated at least 90% of the time. However, I haven't seen them floating up into the air, falling onto the tracks, or glitching about like you would expect to see in Train Sim World 2. I love how they walk up to the train and press the door. If the doors close, which they will do automatically, and they want to get on the train, they will walk up to the door, press the button, the doors will open, they will get on, and then they will walk down the carriage and sit on a seat. That, for me, is fantastic. It does beg the question, why can't we walk up and down the carriages? But it's really nice to see them doing that. I think that's a great achievement. So many games struggle with that single implementation, and they seem to have nailed it perfectly. It does at times look like people are being sucked onto the train rather than stepping onto the train, but again, at this point in the game's development, that just makes me chuckle. 3 years from now, I'd probably find that a bit irritating, but we're nowhere near that stage yet. So blur is something that I absolutely despise in Sims. Whenever I see the option to turn it off, I turn it off. And in this sim, the blur effect seems to cause significant stutters. I mean, it looks horrible. The FPS drops to appalling levels. But again, you know, the optimization isn't there, so I'm not going to go on too much about that. There are definitely some issues around performance, but in this early stage, it's very stable and definitely could be improved upon. Now, the FPS, I have to say, playing at 4K Ultra HD on my 1080 Ti is not, it's not great. It's not the best FPS I've ever seen. It fluctuates quite a bit. It flicks around between, most of the time, it's say on average it's about 30 FPS, but it does dip down quite low, and it does peak up at times as well, up to the 60s. But again, optimization is something that needs to come in time. The key point for me is that it's stable, it doesn't crash. That's quite good. I've only seen one other locomotive on the line going in the opposite direction to me. Don't ever buy Turtle Beach headsets, they're rubbish. Yeah, I've seen one other train going in the opposite direction to me, and that's pretty cool to see, but when that happens, that really tunnels the FPS, and you will get some stutters, especially if you want to look at it or watch it drive past. You will see some significant problems there. Now, if you're playing on 1080p, you might be getting much better mileage than I am, but you know, I have a 4K Ultra HD screen for a reason, and I want to play games in that resolution at 60 FPS is my ideal target. So yeah, on that point, I guess, you know, yes, optimization is definitely something that needs to be looked at and addressed. And if they really are pushing, which it looks like they're going to be, a multiplayer gameplay interaction, then they're going to have to do a lot better in the performance area than they currently are. If you get multiplayer on top of the current performance, I think you're going to have significant problems. So there's a long way for them to go. If they're not going to be able to nail it at release date, which is fine. I understand it's a very complicated thing they're trying to do. Just agree to release in early access. Don't release a game as full release if it isn't in full release state. If you're like, okay, we've reached the point where we've got to release the game, it's not quite where we want it to be, put it in early access. Nobody will complain about it not being 100%. Well, no, that's not true. Some will. Some really will. But anyway. Let's talk about audio. Audio equals immersion. If you've got excellent audio, believable audio, realistic audio, well captured, well placed, playing at the right time, coming from the right area of the cockpit, then you have got guaranteed 90% immersion just from the audio alone. And if all the bells and whistles and switches and dials work as well, then you're going to get immersion overload. It's going to be incredible. Right now, I'd say that the locomotive audio is very good. Not perfect. There are some missing bits, I have to say. It's not yet working in surround sound, so there's no audio occlusion or anything like that. You can't even open the window yet. It's nice, I think, to be able to open the window and have that wind passing by the window and that audio difference, the audio occlusion, that really adds to the realism. I know it's only opening a window and that's not a massive thing for some people, but it really emphasizes the realism and the immersion that the game is delivering. And without that, it's a noticeable thing. Right now, there's also zero, and I do mean zero, like Cheerio. There is absolutely zero ambient audio. There's no birds tweeting, there's no other trains rattling around, there's no cars beeping, there's no passenger sounds, there's no windscreen wiper sounds. There's many missing audio sound bites in the game. There are a lot of missing things. But the spoken elements of the game are very good. I do like how the tutorial is vocally led, and I love the radio comms, the dispatcher talking to you and you talking to them. I think that's brilliant. I really like that. Yeah, I really enjoy it. And like I say, the tutorials are vocally led, although let's talk about the tutorials. So the tutorial is basic. It doesn't cope well. If you want to do anything outside of what it's telling you to do, it'll have a little panic attack. If, for example, you put the pentagraph up and you want to go to an external camera just to look and see if the pentagraph has gone up like it's supposed to, then it's going to freak out. It's going to press number 1 to go back into the cockpit. Why are you not in the cockpit? It does freak out a little bit. It's quite funny. I had a few issues with the tutorial the first time I played it. That could have been me clicking on the wrong thing. I'm not entirely sure, but it didn't work very well, and there are definitely gaps. I'm going to create a tutorial of my own just to help people out, but there are definitely gaps that are not explained at all. Like, for example, the cruise control system, which is not discussed at all. The way in which you're guided to set up the locomotive is not good at all. For example, they say turn the switch to switch number 1, which is number 1. Who knows? Because it goes left and it goes 3 right. So you've got 1 to the left and 3 to the right. Which one is 1? Nobody knows. It's a little bit confusing in that sense. But yeah, the tutorial, it's good that they've got one. I'm glad they've done it. They've kind of copied Dovetail Games in the way that they do it, I have to say. And I'm not sure that they need to do that. Perhaps if they add a lot more realism and really detailed locomotives, then just create a manual like they do on PMDG and let us learn the systems ourselves. Perfectly happy with that. Hopefully they'll evolve their tutorial system, but the tutorials themselves must take a lot of time and a lot of effort, and if it's going to cut down development time just to make a manual, then I, for one, personally quite happy with the manual. Games need spoken tutorials like that. Simulators need detailed documentation. That's the way I see it. So let's discuss the controls and the levels of simulated realism. So the demo does declare that controller support and key binding is something that's coming later. So that's a really positive thing for the future. It's really great news. I remember distinctly having to force Dovetail Games to include keybind options in Train Sim World. I did that with the very first review that I made for the game. They acknowledged that it needed to be done and they did it. And you are all welcome that I made that happen. I also got them to start adding controller support. Now, truth be told, it's bloody awful, and I've never seen anything so poor in all my life. But they have at least tried to do something, which is, some kind of positive. I even got them to re-add head tracking to their to-do list. Despite what some lying Mancunian might have you believe, that was definitely my doing. Now, one of the most important elements of simulation is the simulation element itself. Now, I'm no locomotive expert, and I don't claim to be, but to my untrained eye, the level of simulation here is already very high. Factor in that this is considered to be level 1 of 5 levels of difficulty, then the future for this game, in my opinion, in regards to the level of realism, is very promising indeed. I'm happy that the vast majority of the cockpit buttons and levers do actually appear to be usable, unlike Dovetail Games, and it's nice to have working mirrors as well, unlike Dovetail Games. But I do feel that there is way more complexity that could be introduced in time to this game, and I really hope they go down that route. The dispatch adds a really nice injection of immersion and realism to proceedings, and should this game make it to be multiplayer, then I think that ability to play as the dispatcher could just be incredible. Think, if you will, that sim, but for trains. It could be incredible. It could be so good. The semaphore lighting system appears to be pretty similar to what I am personally familiar with, but I have run into a few issues when trying to navigate my way all the way down the entire route. I will be having another crack at it soon. It's a lot of fun, even when I get it wrong, but yeah, it's definitely it's a locomotive you need to practice and learn with, I think. Right now, I really enjoy and like the way that the controllers work on the EMU, and I think it's going to be vastly better, vastly more fun and immersive and realistic when we do have key binding options and controller support. The rotational switches are an absolute pain to manage when you're trying to use the mouse. It just doesn't work. It's horrible. But on the most part, I found this to be very rewarding indeed. A great sim and a great demo. And yeah, really excited for the future. It is early days. This was my first look at the game. Well, this is all of our first look at the game. And I've got to say that I was quite impressed with the demo. The cockpit controls are a bit of a mixed bag when using the mouse, but they should be vastly better when we've got the controls and the key binding options, as I mentioned. The graphical elements definitely is an area that needs work. Audio is nearly brilliant, but definitely needs more work. Once again, don't buy Turtle Beach headsets, they're bloody awful. And although stable, the game is definitely not well optimized. I have to say that whilst I do like it graphically, there's far more that needs to be done with the lighting, the shadows, the textures, before it will come close to knocking Dovetail Games off the top spot. If there's one thing that Dovetail Games Train Sim World do well, it's the modelling of the locomotive. Never once have I been critical of the locomotive design. I think they are some of the best train models that I've ever seen, and that's really where Dovetail Games stand out. That is their key thing, their unique selling point, is that the modelling of the trains is so good. Rail Sim, I think, have a long way to go to knock Dovetail Games off of that top spot, but in every other area I think they're competitive right now, and who's to say that graphically things are not going to improve between now and release date. I really do hope they will. So yeah, that being said, the potential for this game is definitely there. With the addition of multiplayer, controller support, the greatest sense of realistic simulation that's potentially going to be on offer, this is most definitely one to watch, and I have really enjoyed and really appreciate the fact that they have thrown their hat into the ring and chucked us out a demo so that we can get a little taster for what's to come. I'm really excited. Let me know how you feel about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.